There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, hello, BookTube. I'm a little bit late, or am I, really? In the grand scheme of things, and speaking existentially, am I in fact late? For the mid-year book Freakout tag, this is my 4th, 5th, 6th year that I've done it, and I'm ready to freak out all over again. And I'm also excited to be doing this tag because I actually bought a new blouse just for the purpose of doing this tag, and I've been saving it, so what do you think? Do you like the way it drapes on me? It's a little wrinkly. It's the kind of shirt that I'm not sure will ever be not wrinkly unless I buy an iron or something, but I still like the way it drapes on me. The creator of this tag is somebody who doesn't exist. I mean, if you're not on YouTube, you don't exist. So the creator doesn't exist. That channel name that doesn't exist will be in the show notes. Let's get started. Number 1, the best book you've read so far this year. I'm willing to say that won't change for the rest of the year. This is a Swedish novel in English translation. Collected works by Lydia Sandgren, translated by Agnes Broom. This was a buddy read with Joe Smith. I am still working on my review. Stay tuned. And this is actually one of the very best novels I've read in my life. The praise don't get any higher than that, people. Most books that affect me this deeply leave me mute. I think that I can actually eke out a review. What I'm doing is listening to all the Voxer messages that Joe and I exchanged over the 6 weeks or something that we read it, and making notes, and I think I'll be primed and ready to go. So stay tuned, but this is a novel about, well, it's hard to say what it's about, but the opening premise is, in somewhat modern Sweden, a young mother with a maybe 7-year-old daughter and a newborn baby who has just finished her PhD in history. I think it's history. Yes, history or political science. Maybe a cross-pollination between the two. With a publisher and writer wannabe husband. Walks out of her family's life and never comes back. And so we meet the survivors. Her husband, Martin. Her daughter, who is now maybe 22, and 18-year-old son who had been the newborn. So about 20 years had passed. I am really bad with keeping track of the time differences, time zones, everything. And we follow them and see how much they're getting on with their lives or not, as we're getting flashbacks and trying to piece it all together. You know me, I'm not one that gets excited about a mystery story, but there was a very suspenseful element in this story that made it such a page-turner. And such rich characterization and such profound commentary through story on so many issues that I care about. Gender and love and literature and art. Oh my god, it's all here, folks. And I have this much BookTube political capital, and I'm going to spend it all on convincing you that you need to rush out and get a hold of this and fall into it. Number 2, the best sequel you've read this far. I haven't read any. That was quick. Number 3, a new release you haven't read yet but want to. There's any number of them, but here's one about which that's definitely the case. This is the 3rd novel by the wonderful writer Rowan Hisayo Buchanan, The Sleepwatcher. I read her debut novel, Harmless Like You. I loved it. I read her 2nd novel, Starling Days. I loved it too. Here is her 3rd novel, The Sleepwatcher. Came out earlier this year. A Rowan Hisayo Buchanan protagonist is a young woman, often of mixed ethnicity, Asian and something else, like the author, struggling with mental health challenges. And that was true of the protagonists in the first 2 novels, and appears to be the case here. And in this case, 16-year-old Kit is struggling with horrendous insomnia one summer, and that's the opening premise, and I can't wait to dive in. There's another writer that you should all be reading. You don't have to take my advice all the time, but I really do think you should take my advice about checking out Rowan Hisayo Buchanan. Number 4, the most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and there's, again, lots of contenders, but the one that's making me pee my pants in anticipation is the 2nd novel, if we can call it a novel. His stuff is brilliant, hybridized stuff that's difficult to describe. The Indigenous writer who uncomfortably is situated in Edmonton, Canada, Jordan Abel. And this is being called a novel. It's probably going to be complicated. It's called Empty Spaces. I loved his first book of prose, Nishga, which, again, was it a novel? Was it a memoir? Was it something fabulously in between, in which he explores his indigenous identity? He was raised by his white mother, and he explores all the ramifications of that in this incredibly creative book of poetry and art and critical theory, which doesn't usually float my boat, and transcripts of talks he's given. It's one of the indigenous books that's had the deepest impact on me. I should also say that Jordan Abel is queer, and so this new book is a reimagination of the American writer James Fenimore Cooper's 19th century The Last of the Mohicans, and it goes from there to deal with colonial violence, land, and identity, and all that stuff. And I just can't freaking wait to get my hands on that. Coming up in a month or two. I can't remember exactly when. You can look it up. Number 5, the biggest disappointment. There were a few contenders, but I have gone with a book that I bailed on and was quite devastated to realize was no good at all. And that is a debut queer novel called The New Life by Tom Crewe. And I'm in a minority. I often am in the minority. Lots of other booktubers liked it or loved it. A historical novel about two queer intellectual types in late Victorian Britain, John Addington Symonds and Havelock Ellis. They have thinly disguised pseudonyms in the book, and I just thought they were two of the most boring characters in all of queer literature, if not all of literature. It read like a Henry James novel, and if that floats your boat, you're going to like this. I couldn't tell them apart, despite certain aspects of their character and their life situation that should have distinguished them readily. I was bored to tears, and I didn't finish. And I had been so excited about it. It's probably going to be on the Booker list. It's probably going to be on the short list. It's probably going to win, because I didn't like it. The next one is Biggest Surprise, and that was this Sri Lankan novel that won the Booker last year, The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida, by Shehan Karunatilaka. What surprised me about this was that I loved it with all my heart. It's not a Sean book. It's changed my idea of what a Sean book might be, and it rewired my brain about things like ghosts in literary fiction and spirituality and all the cosmology that goes with that tends to leave me cold. All of that worked in a really fast-paced, vibrant novel that was about Maali Almeida, who had been murdered by the authorities a page before the novel opens, and he's a ghost, and he's in not purgatory, but whatever that might be in Sri Lankan cosmology, and trying to find out who killed him and understand all this stuff and make contact with the people that he cared about who are still alive. And oh my god, it's the kind of book that would have just made me gag if it wasn't so wonderfully, beautifully, excitingly pulled off. What a phenomenal novel. The Booker got it right again. The Booker is getting it right most times, more often than not. As Doris of Aldi Books would say, wow! Favorite new author, debut or new to you? I've got two, and they're not debut authors. My criteria for what constitutes a favorite writer and how somebody gets to that level, that pantheon level of my veneration, is that I must have loved two books they've written. So I have two that qualify this year. One is going way back in the backlist into the 1930s and 40s, up to maybe when was her last novels? 1960s maybe. Jean Rhys, the Caribbean British writer Jean Rhys. And the second novel I read from her was this year, and that was Voyage in the Dark, which I think was 1937. And I read this to a patron, and I just was swept away by the language and the characterization. I read the novel just before this in her publication history, after leaving Mr. Mackenzie. It was a pseudo-buddy read with Ben of Doom Antidote 2 years ago maybe, and loved it. And Voyage in the Dark is about a down-and-out white Caribbean woman whose stepmother pays for her to come from the Caribbean to London, or to the UK, and then promptly ignores her and doesn't support her, and she's got to find her own way, and so she's kind of being a showgirl in, out of the way, not fancy venues, and trying to make ends meet, and getting involved with all the wrong people of the male and female persuasion. I mean, she's sleeping with the men, but she's getting manipulated and victimized by every gender, and I just adored her. She was so lost, she was so pathetic in that basic, literal way. I just cringed at the scrapes she got herself into, at the same time as I would, a paragraph later, a page later, gasp at the gorgeous prose that pulled me so deep into Anna's world. It has created a Jean Rhys obsession for me. I'm now reading very slowly, episodically, reading through her collected short stories and loving them just as much. Jean Rhys, a new favorite. Oh my god. Another favorite, because I read a second book by her and loved it, is Danielle Evans, the black writer from the States. And I read her second collection of shorts fiction, The Office of Historical Corrections. Her first collection I read a year or two ago, Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self. Loved it, and I loved this one perhaps even a bit more, but certainly equal with. Whereas the first collection was pretty much preoccupied with messy relationships that were like friends with benefits, or exes that couldn't stop falling into bed together and had a friendship. There was those kinds of in-between types of interpersonal connection that she explored so well. There's quite a bit of that in here, but there's also an overlay of racial and political American issues that are integrated into Danielle Evans' short story world. She's just one of the best short story writers writing today. Number 8, newest fictional crush. I don't often have one, but this year I do. And how? This was a off-the-beaten-track, quite recent British novel, The Stromness Dinner by Peter Benson. Published. When was it published? 2020. Okay. And the protagonist is Ed Beach, and he and his dad live in London, and they have a home renovation business. Just the two of them. It's a small operation. They're really good at what they do, and this is a first-person narrative from this straight guy, Ed. He's about 27, built like a brick shithouse, sensitive, not educated, but curious about life, with strikingly endearing and idiosyncratic observations of human nature, the world around him, and especially food. He's somebody who works so well with his hands, and he loves cooking and loves eating. And there's, what can I say, gustatorily erotic writing about food in here, and it's told in this very simple voice of somebody who maybe graduated high school. I'm not even sure if he did that, but just has this really plain speaking, wide-eyed wonderment at being in the world. And he's a very sexual being. There's no kind of Me Too creepiness about him. He's a sexual person. We hear a lot about his sex life, his love life, his work. But one of the reasons I fell in love with him is just the way he gets so excited about food. He accepts a job that takes him out of London for a few weeks to go up to the Orkney Islands, which are now threatening to join Norway and leave the UK. You go for it. Various things ensue. It's a character-driven novel. I had a huge crush on Ed Beach. The way he moved through the world and described the world got me all hot and bothered as well. So Ed Beach, the protagonist and first-person narrator of Peter Benson's wonderful novel, The Stromness Dinner. Number 9, newest favorite character. I could have chosen Ed Beach, but no, he's got his due. So I'm going to talk about somebody that I didn't want to jump in bed with, but I very much adored. And that is the unnamed protagonist of this Canadian trans novel, Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian, by Hazel Jane Plante. The protagonist is a trans woman, a trans lesbian woman. Her best friend in the whole world, Vivian, from the parentheses in the title, has quite recently died. She was a straight trans woman, so she was not interested in women sexually, but our protagonist was, and they were best friends. And this is a fabulous and fabulously bizarre encomium eulogy tribute to her friend Vivian. Maybe 60 to 70% of it is told in the form of an encyclopedia about this bizarre TV show that doesn't exist in the real world, but exists very palpably in the world of this novel. This one season TV show that Vivian loved, and she made anybody who cared about her watch the DVDs with her. And our protagonist watched them, and she thought, oh, this is really strange, and I don't like it. But she watched it because Vivian loved it. And then after Vivian died, she became obsessed with it and compiled an encyclopedia of every character, every reference, every actor, every aspect of the production of and reception to this TV show called Little Blue. The chapters are organized alphabetically with all the characters, actors, and so on. And threaded throughout the encyclopedia entries are our protagonist's reminiscences of Vivian, and the narrative unfolds about their friendship. And it's really affecting. It's really a strange little novella. This was another buddy read with Joe Smith. Hello, Joe! I need to have a category where I can just talk about Joe Smith, because she's showing up a lot here, because she's such an important part of my reading life. And we were just won over by how ingeniously all of that was woven together to make something that was so transpositive, so literarily satisfying, and, got us all verklempt. What an incredible little novel. And the unnamed protagonist is my favorite character in anything I have read this year so far. Number 10 is a book that made you cry. Well, this book came damn close. I always say every year I never cry with something that I read. I get a little teary, maybe that's as far as it goes, and I often get pushback from some of my female viewers in particular that say, really, you don't cry? What's wrong with you? I'm a man, that's what's wrong with me. This book I read to one of my patrons, and so I think it was the fact that I was verbalizing, that I was reading it aloud, that made my defenses down, and my voice caught where I'd have to pause, especially near the end of this book, because I was, on the verge of just losing it. And that is another novel that I think is from the same year as the Jean Rhys one. Certainly it's from the 1930s, 1937, and this is by a white American male writer. What the hell? They Came Like Swallows by William Maxwell. This is a novel that's set at the end of World War I, and I always forget exactly where. It's in a small city in America. If you know anything about me, you know that setting is not so important to me, but it's not Chicago. Chicago's too big, but some small city. And the flu epidemic is starting to sweep across the continent. This is about an American family, and the first narrator, the first point of view is the youngest boy, the first third of the novel, and his view of his family and the way that the epidemic is starting to impact his family. And then the middle third is from his older brother, and the final third is from the dad. And really, one of the main characters is the mother, but isn't given a voice, but we get three different perspectives on her. The deadly flu epidemic does wreak havoc on this family, and it is so incredibly moving, and the prose is so beautiful that I'm putting a temporary moratorium on my pronouncement that white men can't write. This was just a deeply affecting novel. I can't remember anything that I've read in a long, long time that explored and triggered grief in me, the reader, so profoundly. Number 11, a book that made you happy. Well, for years I would poo-poo this one because I'm a consumer of literary fiction. I don't read stuff to make me happy. Well, I've kind of pulled back from that. So I do have a book that I reread this year. I read it for the first time last year and reread it this year, and it does. I can use the present tense because I've read it twice. It does make me really happy, and that is this novella, Happy Sands, by the Calgary, Alberta, Canada writer, Barb Howard. I've had her on my channel to talk about this novel. I've more recently had her on my channel to talk about novellas in general, and I read this to a patron this year and loved it even more than when I read it to myself. last year. This novel, ironically, Happy Sands, made me very happy. It's hilarious, and it takes you deep if you're open to the deeper themes that she's exploring through all the humor about this family from Calgary that goes to the same beat-up, dumpy resort on a lake in BC summer after summer for a week. It's crazy. It's very funny. And there is a lot of insight into human nature if you read between the lines. Oh, this is the best. This is the one where I have a big revelation, an announcement. Get yourself a drink and sit down. Number 12, favorite book to film adaptation you saw this year. I almost never watch movies, so I almost never watch adaptations of books. And the fact that I watched this film adaptation is just insane, because I loathe the book. I couldn't finish it. The book is Call Me By Your Name by André Aciman. And I take no small delight in trashing that novel any chance I get, because I just thought it was so schlocky, so horrifically sentimental and flowery writing. I just couldn't stand it. And the last time that I did my little spiel on the André Aciman novel, when I go off on my little tangents and I pontificate and my shouty, ranty opinions, usually the next day or the next week I think about it and think, well, Sean, were you really fair? You know, should you give it another try? Should you consider other views? And then within 5 minutes I say, no, I shouldn't. I'm right. But in this case, I got curious about the movie. And I know that Greg F. Supposedly Fun loves the novel and also loved the movie. What I'd also forgotten was that I had a bite-sized book chat a few weeks before with somebody who was talking about Timothée Chalamet. Now, I knew the name Timothée Chalamet, but I'm so far removed from modern cinema, you know, any movies that came out since 1960, that I didn't really know who he was or whatever, but he was the lead in the movie of Call Me By Your Name. So I started watching clips from the movie, and then I started watching clips from interviews that Timothée Chalamet has given, and I got obsessed, deeply obsessed. And it's not even a crush like my crush on Ed Beach in that novel, because I'm not that attracted to him. He's beautiful, facially and hair, he's beautiful, but he's too slim for me, too skinny. So he's not my type, but his personality, he's so adorable that I have, in the last 2 or 3 months, and I'm speaking about this publicly for the first time, people, I have developed an obsession with, and it's almost like he's my spirit guide. If I need a little pick-me-up, if I need to be cheered up, I watch any one of a number of hilarious or adorable TV interviews that Timothée Chalamet has given over the years.
Was like shocked. I like looked behind me. I don't know. It was super weird. Yeah, I
always
like
find
you
it
said,
disarming, right? Because you coming out of a restaurant or whatever, just had you ate, and then all of a sudden someone's out, and it's as if you've done something terribly wrong. They're snapping pictures and they're aggressive, and
well, it's not that there's like one guy.
That's still pretty great.
Yeah. He probably thought I was like Freddie Highmore or something. You know?
You're better looking than Freddie Highmore.
No, you can't say that on TV. No.
Since this movie came out, the interviews are about this movie, or he's more recently in Dune and this and that. And then I never took the next step to actually watch the movie until I went to Edmonton last month, and I finally watched the movie. And even though I thought it was a deeply flawed movie in certain ways, I thought Timothée Chalamet was wonderful, and it was a deeply moving movie because of how well Timothée Chalamet did with the role. But what I'm mainly wanting to announce is that I'm obsessed with Timothée Chalamet, and it's not even a sexual thing, boys and girls. I can't wait for Willy Wonka, the Wonka movie, to come out later this year. Can you breathe? 13, favorite review or favorite video? You tell me. 14, most beautiful book you've bought this year. You know what I've realized just recently? I don't give a crap about book covers. So I racked my brains, and I don't do cover buys anymore. I used to. So here's one with a pretty cover, but I didn't buy it because of the cover. Brigitte Reimann's sibling. She was an East German novelist, and it's translated from the German by Lucy Jones, and it's got an interesting cover. Enough about that, because I just don't, it's just not, doesn't, I'm still fussy about my covers, but a beautiful cover doesn't, I don't care about it being beautiful. Has to be interesting or something. I can't stand Fitzcarraldo covers or Persephone book covers, but I'm no longer seduced by a beautiful cover. That's what I'm trying to say. Number 15, the last one. What books do you need to read by the end of the year? I would love to finish Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. I think it's a 1768, 850,000 page novel that I've been doing on audio for 3 years maybe. And I'm about 12% through volume 3. Each of the 3 audiobook volumes are 34 hours, and I've done the first 2, and I'm now about 12% into the third one, and I'm hoping to finish that, and a bunch of other books I'd like to finish, but that's enough. I've been talking unedited for 40 minutes. So that is my take on the mid-year book Freakout tag. Thanks for watching.